Due to this work session for the Holiday Island Board of Commissioners. It's Monday, August the 15th at 9 o'clock. Our goal this morning really is to review the status of the Holiday Island water and sewer system, to get updates on it, to learn what challenges it has, to learn how it stands in relationship to other rural water systems. And so we have asked a representative from the engineering company that's worked for a long time with Holiday Island to come and speak with us, and I thank him so much for clearing his calendar and making it possible for him to be here. What I'd like to ask is that we let him do his presentation first, then we'll let the Board of Commissioners ask any questions that they might have, and then we'll turn it over and allow the residents to ask any questions that they might have. If you don't mind cooperating with that agenda. So at this point in time, I'll turn it over to our district manager, Mr. Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To echo what you said, I want to thank Jeff Denhart, ESI Engineering. ESI is located over in Springdale, so it's quite a drive for him to come out here, but he's always willing to do so when we need him. Jeff has worked with this water system for a long time, studied the water system, probably knows it better than anyone on the planet. And so we're thankful for his work with us, and they've been very responsive when we have needs out here at Holiday Island. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you again for being here.
Oh, yeah, appreciate it. I'm happy to come over. Like was mentioned, I've worked over here in Holiday Island for quite some time. I think probably 2005 or 6, somewhere in there was the first year that I came over to work. I was with a different firm at the time, but worked on the previous wastewater treatment plant expansion, and then lots of other work. Smaller jobs here and there throughout the district, paving, water drainage type stuff. And I brought materials to talk about a couple of different jobs right now, or projects ongoing. One's ongoing, one is a new project. I don't know, Danny, which one you want to start with. I have improvements at the wastewater treatment plant to go over, and then of course the water system discussion.
Could we start with the wastewater treatment plant?
Okay.
That new system.
Okay, so with the wastewater treatment plant, with your newest permit that was issued for the wastewater treatment plant, you got some new limits on your effluent, and that's total residual chlorine. That's something that we're seeing a lot of our clients, a lot of treatment plants in the area get. I suspect that almost every treatment plant in the state is going to end up with this type of limit. Chlorine is toxic to certain creatures, really small aquatic creatures. It's very toxic. So the state has started cracking down on how much chlorine you can have in your residual. Chlorine is used to disinfect the effluent right before it's discharged. So when you get a total residual chlorine limit, there's a couple of ways you can attack the problem. You can do what's called dechlorinating. So after you disinfect, there will be a little bit of chlorine left over. And then you can add another process where you add some other chemicals to exhaust that remaining chlorine before you discharge, in your case, into the lake. Or you can switch, another way you could attack the issue is switch your disinfection method altogether, which is what we're recommending, and sort of getting out of the chlorination business and using ultraviolet light for the disinfection process. Chlorine is just a hazardous chemical to deal with in the first place, so you get some benefits of switching your disinfection process, and you sort of get a little bit of offset in the cost because you no longer have to buy chlorine. It's not a one-for-one swap, but it's better than just adding another treatment process to the end of your chlorination process. So I talked with Dan about this project down at the treatment plant, and we worked through some of our contacts, looking at different equipment. And what we're recommending is a UV disinfection unit from a company called Trojan. And Trojan has really been the industry leader in ultraviolet disinfection for almost as long as that technology has existed. So they're very well known, very well respected, and we could meet the needs of the treatment facility with sort of a small unit, standalone unit. We would not have to build a concrete channel to set this in. It's the type of unit that's freestanding. You can just pipe it in and pipe it out, which I think lends itself very nicely to upgrading the existing facility. You know, you're fairly space limited at your treatment plant, so I want to keep in mind using the space efficiently, and this would do that. So I gave you all some handouts. First page is a preliminary opinion of probable cost, and then the second page is a little bit of a preliminary layout sketch that sort of shows you how this would fit on the treatment plant site. Now, this is not a construction drawing, it's more of a conceptual drawing. So just to give you an idea of what we would be doing. So the dark black lines would be new piping that would be installed underground at the treatment plant site, and we would intercept flow coming out of your filter flow control box, pipe it over to a new unit that would be set on a concrete pad, and then from there pipe it back over to the manhole that sits just sort of west of the existing chlorine contact tank. Doing it this way would allow the chlorination process to stay in operation while these new upgrades are installed, and then once they're ready, you can quickly make the shift over and then abandon the chlorine contact basin. So I want to just start off by saying, and I'm sure everybody is fully aware of this, but estimating costs in today's construction environment is very challenging. And the number that's in front of you today may be a little eye-popping. I know even a year or two ago, I would have thought this is a crazy number. And I've put a big number in front of you, not knowing if it's actually big enough. If we did this job today, it may go over. It's very challenging from our perspective, estimating work right now. Getting bidders on a job is challenging. It's not unusual to bid a job out and only have one bidder. And then you're just sort of stuck with, well, did we award the job or not? And how do we know we're getting the best price? Well, unfortunately, it's not a great environment for that right now. So I just want to caution you that this is just an opinion of probable cost. You really don't know right now what jobs are going to cost until you do bid them out. And hopefully you get multiple bidders. And hopefully you get some good prices. But
Would you mind telling the audience what the amount is?
so the amount that I have here today on the probable cost estimate is $729,000. And that would include purchasing and installation of the UV disinfection equipment, the necessary yard piping to connect it at your facility, electrical and controls necessary to run and monitor the equipment, tying it into your existing outfall line, and then maintenance bond from the contractor. And anytime you're digging trenches in the state, you're required to have a line item in for shoring and trench safety, so there's a small line item in there for that. I've included some contingency, 10% contingency. It's pretty standard for us at the preliminary stages. And then our fees for the design and inspection on the job, and then a little bit of money for permitting and regulatory fees. So you would have to, pay the health department to review the job, pay the Department of Environmental Quality to modify the permit. And so just some small administrative costs that would be associated also. I'd be happy to take any questions on the wastewater project.
Let's do it that way. Yes.
A few of the very obvious questions, I think, probably from all of us. Who is telling us we have to do this? How much time do we have to do it in? And the big one, since this is probably being mandated by a government, are there grants or anything to help all these communities everywhere comply with this?
Yeah, those are all great questions, Bob. Number one, who's telling you that you have to do it? That's ADEQ, the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality. When they issued your latest permit, they included a new limit for total residual chlorine. They're not telling you specifically you have to use UV, but they're telling you you can't really discharge residual chlorine anymore. And it's our opinion that the UV disinfection would be the best way to move forward for the improvement district. How long do we have to meet this new limit? The permit that was issued has a 3-year compliance period in it. So you're sort of operating in a grace period. And that was issued, Dan, I forget the month, but it was earlier this year, right? March of this year. So March of 2025, you would have to come into compliance with those new limits under threat of enforcement action if you did not. And then it is, since this is a state mandated thing, are there grant monies available or other funding opportunities available? Yes. So the state has a few different funding programs through what used to be called the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission. Now it's the Natural Resources Division of the Arkansas Department of Agriculture. That did not get simpler when they reorganized, but they have several programs. The primary funding program that the state offers is the revolving loan fund. It's money, it's EPA money, but it's administered through the state. They have primarily loan dollars available, but they also at times have what they call principal forgiveness. Technically it's a loan, but in essence it's a grant, it's a loan that you don't have to repay. However, right now they don't have any of the principal forgiveness money. So they're offering loans at the moment. They have a few other small programs. They have a general obligation bond program. They have a water and sewer solid waste program that they can issue grants through, generally on a small scale, $100,000 or under. But sort of the big boogeyman hanging over everything is ARPA funds and infrastructure bill funds. So those are federal dollars that have come into the state recently but have yet to be allocated. Or at least in the case of the infrastructure money, it has yet to be allocated. The ARPA funds are coming in 2 tranches, the first of which has already been released by the governor, and that not exclusively, but for the most part went to broadband internet. There is a second tranche coming with hopes that some of it will be available for water and sewer. I know there was just recently, a couple of weeks ago, a joint committee meeting down in Little Rock for the city, county, and local committees for both the House and the Senate. And industry groups came to lobby those committees, urging them and to urge the governor to release some of this money for water and sewer. It's around $500 million, maybe slightly more. We don't expect all of that would go to water and sewer, but we're hopeful. And a lot of that would come in the form of grant and would be very beneficial for everybody statewide. This is something that ANRC has been talking about for a while now, so there's a lot of interest in the state. They issued a survey probably about a year ago now, statewide. We submitted here on your behalf for some projects, but statewide about $5 billion worth of requests came in. So the money that's available is not going to cover the need for the state. But we're hopeful that the governor will release some of that for water and sewer. That would be huge, and certainly could be a benefit for this or other projects for the district. The infrastructure money, it is also coming. There are earmarked funds in there for water and sewer. It's not quite as much as what could be available through the ARPA funds, because a lot of it is earmarked for lead service line replacement. I don't know that Holiday Island has much of that, but that would also be beneficial. I think the idea on that money is to pair it with some loans, so it would not be 100% grant in that funding mechanism, but there are some grant dollars out there coming, we hope, but at the present moment through the state, there aren't any available. We're hoping that it could happen anytime now. Another way you could fund the project is through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Development branch. They have some water and sewer funding available with grant dollars. But the application process there is a little more onerous. It takes time and effort, and our costs go up a little bit just because of the process. But there is funding opportunities available, yes. That's a long answer, I apologize.
We're not opposed to time and effort,
Yeah, right.
if it means money. But, and I'll shut up after this, but Jeff, given the fact that we discharge into the state of Missouri, would this project meet their requirements as well? And
So, yes, this permit, and I know this from the expansion that we did in the mid-aughts, had some challenges. You know, the permitted facilities in Arkansas, the discharges in Missouri. And when we were designing that project, we were first issued a set of limits that we were designing under, and then changed mid-project because the Missouri Department of Natural Resources wanted the limits tightened, and ADEQ acquiesced to MDNR's requests. So I think that those sorts of issues are ironed out, and that's already baked in to your existing permit. I don't expect any surprises. So yes, I think this would meet Missouri's requirements.
Go ahead,
Sure.
yeah.
Jeff, when people take a tour of our plant, and the fellows up there do a good job of showing them how it works, and at the end, they give you a glass of water, and say, Mr. Brown, how would you like to taste what's going out into Table Rock Lake? And some take it and some don't. But, and I'm making light of this, but it's important. Will it change at all what's going out into Table Rock Lake with this process versus what we have today?
Yes, it would. To the naked eye, it will not look any different. But there would no longer be chlorine in the effluent, and it would be a lot less harmful to any sensitive aquatic organisms that are living near the outfall. You know, Table Rock Lake is huge, so once you get further out into the lake proper, there'd be no discernible difference, but right at the outfall, yes.
The other question I have is on your sketch. Thanks for bringing that. Your plan, it says existing reinforced concrete chlorine contact tank.
Yes.
What would that be used for later then? We know?
Well, once the UV disinfection unit was online, that could be taken out of service, and potentially at a future date, if you needed the space for something else, it could be removed and repurposed. Or you could use that tank for another purpose if one arose in the future. So for the moment, for the immediate future, you could just take it offline. There'd be no need to wreck it out unless you wanted to.
Good.
Jeff, one of the things I think we have to do is be realistic about funding. I happened quite inadvertently to listen to the Department of Agriculture talk about the water and wastewater grant availability that had essentially been cut in half from what he thought it was going to be. Based on your experience in dealing with lots of other rural water systems, I have a hard time thinking that Holiday Island is going to be high up on the list when there's so many more other indigent communities that have much worse problems. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you think we should rely on grant funding or plan to do it ourselves?
Well, I think it's probably not reasonable to expect a large portion to come as a grant. There are ways where I think we can offset some of the costs with a grant, but whether it's through the state or through the federal government, they both consider the economic prosperity of the community as part of the calculus on how they allocate grant funds. Generally, they want to look at a metric called the median household income, and Holiday Island is fortunate that the MHI here is higher than a lot of the surrounding areas. I would count yourselves lucky rather than unlucky. And that makes you less eligible for grant funds, but it also makes your quality of life a little higher. So I think it's fortunate for Holiday Island. But it does make it less likely to receive grants, or when you do receive them, they're smaller than some of the poorer communities.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I add something? I know how important it is to be kind of plugged in Little Rock. So our state representative, Harlan Breaux, who is a resident here in Holiday Island, has done everything he can so far to help us, be on the radar. And I've been in regular contact with him, and he's been speaking to Wes Ward, who's over the Department of Agriculture, and I know that Jeff was involved in some conversations at a recent conference. So we're doing what we can to stay plugged in and try to find an opportunity to go to Little Rock, to go before that committee down there to plead our case, and then we have that assistance. And I want to say thank you to Harlan Breaux for doing what he's doing to help us at the state level to get this grant, even though, as you said, realistically, we don't expect to get the full amount that we've asked for, but every little bit helps.
And that's something that, Danny has been proactive on working with us. We have submitted some applications to the state. So there is a request for funds that is currently down at the state. However, we're sort of in a holding pattern, hoping that some of this grant money through ARPA be released, and it would make the terms of the funding more attractive. I think we still have enough time that we can afford to wait, at least on this project for sure.
Jeff, another on that same line, we built our plant, I think it was 07, 08, and it was right after we got here, and it was $6.5 million, I think, and we're still paying on a bond. But would that committee look at that, where we have Bethel Heights down near your town, and Springdale took them over because they couldn't run their sewer plant. But would the committee look at that as, Holiday Island has sunk $7 million plus interest over many years, and they've got a really nice plant up there, and now we come up with this mandate, would that cut any slack for us?
Well, as part of their calculus in determining, affordability and how much grant you might be eligible for, they do look at, your overall operations and maintenance costs, which does include debt service from previous loans. So they will factor that into the calculus.
Okay.
Does it give you sort of a hall pass, get out of jail free credit with the state that you've been a good steward? Not as much as it probably should. But what they don't do, they're not mad at you like they are mad at some other folks.
Yeah.
But you would like to get a little bit more of a pat on the back for being good stewards, but
Right.
no.
Okay.
It's the squeaky wheel.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Any more questions or comments from the commissioners? Does anyone in the audience have a question about the sewer plant dechlorinization project? Yes, in the back?
You want me to come up, or I think you can?
I think we can hear you. Go ahead and stand up, please.
Hi, Alex Markovich, 22 Mission Hills Lane. Question I have was, I know it's a conceptual idea at the moment, and that's what you base your pricing on. Have you had a chance to compare the UV light against a system that was already installed on a per capita basis anywhere else in the country?
You mean other comparable UV systems?
Exactly.
Yes. So we've got experience designing and installing these at other treatment facilities. I've got one under design for a comparably sized community now. I've got one that's under construction currently. So, and then of course ESI's got years of experience with these. So yes, we're very familiar with these types of systems. Both the capital cost, what it takes to install the infrastructure, as well as the operations and maintenance costs. Yes.
Okay, there's two more subparts. Are these projects in Arkansas or elsewhere?
Arkansas, yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right, the other item was, how old is this system, or how long has it been in use?
The
2 decades,
existing,
a decade? Or?
the chlorine
No,
system?
the UV system.
Oh, UV, let's see, I want to say it came out in the 80s, really. So it's technology that is proven, has been around for quite a long time. We've got no concerns about the viability of the technology. The thing that has limited UV for a while has been the cost.
Yes.
UV historically has been expensive because the lamps were expensive to replace. But lamp technology has greatly improved in the last 40 years, and they're not nearly as expensive to replace. They last longer, they're more efficient, you don't need quite the power that you used to need. So the price has become pretty competitive.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, quick question, and I'm not trying to pin you down on any numbers because we all know this is estimates floating in the cosmos somewhere. If this thing comes in at, say, 750K, what is your estimate of what might be available in grants and whatever, 50%, 20%, whatever?
Well, depending on the funding mechanism, if you went through USDA rural development, they would tell you that you're eligible for up to 45% of the project through a grant. But it's been our experience recently that you probably would not get that high of a percentage. That's an up to a maximum amount that they would offer. I would suggest that it's probably half of that, maybe. You might get 25% grant, maybe less. With the state, unless the ARPA funds or the infrastructure funds become available soon, it would be at the beginning of their next fiscal year before I would expect any grant money available. So currently, through the state, you would get no grants for this project.
So we're looking at roughly, you're gonna be lucky if you get 200,000 out of the whole bill.
Yeah, I would feel good about that. I would feel good about it if you got a $200,000 grant, yes.
And the rest we would come up with on our own.
Right, and that would be financed. You could finance it in probably a couple different ways depending on which agency you go with, but either way, low interest, long-term loan.
Okay. The other question would be, we have a state and a city. Does one or the other entity have a better chance at grants, loans, whatever, than the other by I guess for lack of better terms, possessing it?
No, really for those funding programs that I've discussed, it's the eligibility, is the same, whether it's an improvement district or a municipality. You're eligible for the same funds. There are some programs that you can't access unless you're a municipality, but the ones that I'm talking about for these projects, no difference.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Once this thing is constructed, who pays for the electrical output to run the system?
So that would be the improvement district paying the O&M cost, and of course, ultimately, operations and maintenance costs get passed to the customer, whether it's through rates, or I know Holly Island has assessments. So ultimately, the district is responsible for those costs, and then the customers, as with every utility, sharing those costs.
So then typically with the UV treatment, what is that, our electrical output compared to the chlorine?
It's a definitely more electrical demand than UV. The UV treatment process, you have small pumps feeding the chemical into the treatment stream. So it's definitely a much larger demand for the UV, but again, you're somewhat offsetting it because you're no longer purchasing chemicals. The chlorine cost goes away. Again, it's not a one-for-one swap. I do anticipate an increased O&M cost because of this project, but you would also have an increased O&M cost if you, say, wanted to dechlorinate. Because again, now you're buying a whole new set of chemicals. You need a new basin to add them and mix the chemical in. So because of the permit changes, there's really no way to avoid increased operations costs for the district.
There's another question back here, I believe.
Yeah, just real quick, we're talking about all these grants and stuff that's available. Do we have anybody that is well-versed on these grants, that knows how to keep up with this stuff and what's out there? Is that what you guys?
Yeah, we are very well-versed in the application process for all of these funding mechanisms. Now, there are some grant funding processes that require some outside assistance. Say if you were going to get a community development block grant through the Arkansas Economic Development Commission, then you would need a grant administrator. But Holiday Island's not going to be eligible for those funds on this project, so we wouldn't have to worry about it. But if we were doing a project where you had that, you would need an outside administrator. That could be provided by the Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District in Harrison, or you could get an independent grants administrator, and we know several of those that could assist also.
Okay, another other question I had, we mentioned our plant is in Arkansas, but we discharge into Missouri, plus the fact that I'm sure the Corps of Engineers has some input as to what goes into that lake. I'm not sure how all that plays out. But my question is the Arkansas requirement that we're talking about, coming about in March of 25 or whatever it is, does it match up with Missouri, or is there a different requirement? Or are there different mandates for what can go into the water and what can't?
Yeah, so it matches up perfectly well with Missouri. I don't, like I said, I don't think there are any issues between Arkansas and Missouri on this particular effluent quality. Again, you're taking you're already, right now, currently, you're discharging residual chlorine into the lake. Whatever we do, whether it's ultraviolet or you decide, hey, let's not do this, let's dechlorinate, whatever you end up doing, you're going to remove a chemical that you're currently discharging into the lake will no longer be discharged into the lake. So I don't see any reason why Missouri would object to that.
My question is, does Missouri require the same thing that Arkansas is coming out with, or are their requirements more lax? And how does the Corps of Engineers play into that? So is it like 3 people we've got to satisfy, or just Missouri, or how does that work out?
Well, I know Arkansas and Missouri coordinate on all the permittees along the border, much like Arkansas coordinates with other states where they share those borders. The Corps is really not going to have too much input on the quality of water that's going to the lake. That's more governed by DEQ. Now there are issues. If we went down to modify the outfall structure, then the Corps would certainly be interested in activities, construction activities happening, inside their take line. Fortunately, on this project, we wouldn't be doing that. We would not be doing any work inside Corps property, so there's not any Corps permitting processes that we would have to do here. We would need construction permits from DEQ. We'd need discharge permit modifications from DEQ. We'd need health department approval on the project. But I think the coordination with Missouri, that's happening at the state level, and it has already happened with the issuance of the new permit. So I don't anticipate any friction with Missouri at all, and the Corps would not be involved on this particular project.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes. Alex?
I didn't get a chance to look at the numbers, but what's the actual number for the construction that you put in as part of the 700,000? What's the number for the engineering? Did you put in anything for finance? Is there some kind of a maintenance number in there?
Yeah, okay, so construction costs with the contingency, around 640,000. Engineering on a project of this size, around 80,000. And then permitting and regulatory fees, we've got a couple of $1,000s there for that. There's a little rounding there, so that may not exactly add up to 729,000. That's the rough costs.
I think the lady over there had a question, and then I got another one.
Yes, I've been reading that people are concerned about the safety of the water because of the drop system. The aquifers are low, the well water is low. Do we need to be concerned about our water system?
That's the next discussion.
We'll be talking about water in a little while.
Just a minute.
This is sewer.
Yeah, we're talking about it.
I don't think this project would impact.
Okay, I thought you were talking about the water system and all, because you mentioned the lake.
Right,
And
right.
the coordination and everything, so I thought that concerned was all. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Is it possible to extend the discharge line further out and avoid doing all the work that is being considered?
Is it possible to extend the discharge line? I guess nothing is impossible, but if you have, enough money, you can really do whatever you want. But extending the discharge line would not affect your permit limits at all, and it would not change the processes that we're recommending.
Still have the residual. As a follow-up to that, because you mentioned that when you look at, the Table Rock Lake is very big, and if you're in the middle of the lake, there's no effect. That's why I asked that question.
Right, no, they still want to know, they're still regulating what's coming out of the pipe. No matter where you're discharging it in the lake, you can't have the residual chlorine. Now, there is an old expression you know, in engineering, that dilution is the solution to pollution. In this case, there would be no real benefit. Where they sample your effluent would not be underwater at the discharge point in the lake. They're sampling it on the treatment plant property, and that's where they're measuring, you know, how much chlorine is in the water that you're discharging. True, once it goes out the pipe into the many, many millions of gallons that are in the lake, it dilutes to, you know, non-detectable levels, but that's not where you're being regulated.
Is this a requirement that originated from the EPA, or is this a requirement that Arkansas made up?
Well, I'd say those two sort of go hand in hand. You know, the mandate ultimately comes from the EPA, but the EPA has given the state the authority to manage it. So ultimately, it comes from the federal government, from the EPA, but the state here is in charge, through the Department of Environmental Quality, is in charge for enforcing it.
Okay, I understood your answer, but is the exact requirement that produced the change that was added into the permit this year, did that come from EPA? Or I know that Arkansas manages it, but did they make up this number that's going to affect you in 2025, or us?
Off the top of my head, I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know, but I could look into it for you and get back with an answer.
I would think, given that
To me, the two entities go hand in hand.
Yes.
if Missouri is administering basically the same
Yes.
requirements,
MDNR
imply that
is,
it might have come from
EPA.
EPA.
yeah, MDNR is functioning under the same authorization as ADEQ. EPA grants them, you know, the power to enforce Missouri's environmental laws.
Does Missouri's law take effect at the same time, March 2025? Since our discharge is going to Missouri, does that still apply to us here in Arkansas? How does that work?
No, the permit is issued by Arkansas, and so the terms in the permit issued here are what govern that 2025 timetable. And not everybody is gonna share. Say you have a neighbor that's in the same situation, but their permit, the permits are issued on 5-year bases. And so at the end of the 5-year period, they issue a new permit for your facility. Not everybody is on that same schedule. So where your 5-year permit began in March of this year, another city's 5-year permit may not start until 2025 and go until 2030. So not everybody is on the same schedule, but I suspect within the next 5 to 10 years, everybody in the state will have one of these type limits, unless you're discharging into water that is, you know, already very dirty, you know, like the Arkansas River. A lot of the permits that are issued along there are not nearly as stringent as the limits you have here in Holiday Island.
Jeff, can I ask you a question? Because one of the things we have to look at is cost. And I'm sure that there is a rationale based on all the experiences you have with these two different systems, why you're advocating UV system versus the dechlorinization. Can you explain your reasoning on that?
Well, a lot of it has to do with, dechlorinating. All you are doing is adding a new treatment process on to what you're already doing. You are only adding cost to your operations and maintenance. You're bringing in a new chemical that Dan has to feed at the plant, or your staff have to feed at the plant. You're bringing in new safety hazards that you have to take under consideration. UV is a relatively safe process. You are replacing a process with a new process, so you are getting some cost offset by doing it. And then you no longer have to worry about ever violating a total residual chlorine limit. With a dechlorination process, you still have the specter of, oh, what if we have an upset and you could still violate your permit, even with a new process. But with UV, you've totally eliminated chlorine from your treatment process, so you will never violate your total residual chlorine limit. So there's some reduction in risk also.
Madam Chairman, I had another question of Jeff. We just completed a project of paving State Line Road in Hawk, and it was a cooperation with the city of Holiday Island, and we had a contractor from out of state, in state, but not local. That brings up the question of how many contractors do you have, know in either Missouri or the surrounding states, Arkansas, who would bid on this, and it doesn't matter that we're 3 or 4 hours from Little Rock as far as where the contractors are from.
That is a tough question. We know quite a few contractors that would be capable of doing this type of work. Probably double-digit contractors in the area that could do this work for you.
Okay.
But asking me how many are going to bid on your project at any particular moment, that's a tough one to answer. Within the last year or so, it's been tough to get more than 1 or 2 bidders on any project. I did have one a year ago where I got 6 bidders. And that was incredibly unusual for recent bidding history. It was actually, I was floored that we got that many. But I've also had jobs that were multi-million-dollar jobs, what I would consider good jobs, 1 bidder.
Wow.
So far, we've been fortunate that we've not had a job where there was no bidders. But could that happen? It could. I couldn't guarantee you that it wouldn't.
Thank you.
Dave, did you have another question?
Quick question. One of your previous comments kind of opened up a can of worms, I'm thinking. On dilution. Having been certified in nuclear reactors and systems, I've been experienced in a little bit of it. You're saying that the effluent ratings are basically taken at the end of the pipe being discharged.
No.
Why can't we dilute? Why can't Dan open up the valve on the inside end, dilute it down, and all of a sudden our system is now compliant under the technical aspects?
Well, I guess in theory, I guess you could do that. You could spend the money to put potable water in your effluent stream and dilute all the concentrations.
I don't know how far out of whack we are.
Yeah, I don't know. Dan, I don't think the state would smile on that. No, I don't know that it would be economically beneficial either.
What'd you say, Dan?
I rather imagine Dan isn't going to risk his license by doing that.
Jeff, the effluent point where they measure is right there at the contact chamber.
Yeah.
There is no way we can,
Okay.
it just can't work. And that's why we can't also, you can't dechlorinate it because we don't have enough space, so.
You would build a new
Okay.
tank to dechlorinate.
Yeah.
Jeff, I realize you didn't prepare a proposal for the alternative method of dealing with this problem. And nobody in this room, I would hope, would hold you to a number if you were to just say, can you give us just a rough idea of a comparison between a $729,000 program and the alternative of adding chemicals and
Well,
dealing with
I
that?
think with the dechlorination process, I feel comfortable in stating that it would definitely exceed $1 million for that alternative. I mean, you're
That says it right
that's what I
there.
you're building a new tank, and the site itself is not conducive, to doing so. So construction at your plant is challenging. We know that from the last job because the cost was pretty high. If you look at the dollars per treated gallon, your previous expansion was on the high end.
Yeah.
But it was because the space constraints that you're working in. Other facilities have a luxury of a lot of open land. Construction there is a little easier. It's not quite so easy. Plus you had the complication of the state line running through the treatment facility property. And that added, you know, some complexity to it as well.
No, that, you answered my
I
question.
think you answered the question fully, just a minute ago. All right, let's move along to talking about our water system, the quality of the water system, the lines in the water system, the challenges of the water system, if you could.
Sure.
And thank you for the fullness of your explanation.
Oh, yeah, no problem, no problem. So I would say, just starting off, Holiday Island has a fairly complex water system. Because of the topography of Holiday Island, it is a lot more complicated than a water system that's, you know, over in the Delta or in the River Valley. You have a lot of hills, and therefore you have a lot of pressure differential in your system. You have a lot of pressure relief valves regulating pressure in your system. You have quite a few storage tanks for the size of your system. You have multiple wells, a lot of pumps. Overall, Holiday Island, it's not the largest distribution system by any stretch of the imagination, but it is certainly one of the more complicated distribution systems. Additionally, go ahead.
I was just going to ask a question just for perspective. How many systems, projects, communities does ESI work with?
Oh,
I mean, I would think you have a huge point of reference.
so we work, really we focus in northwest and north central Arkansas, but we also go down into southwest Arkansas and into the River Valley. Scores of clients, maybe 100+ water systems that we've worked in. For me, the one that most closely resembles Holiday Island is Bella Vista. It's very similar in topography and complexity of the system, and the structure of Bella Vista closely mirrors Holiday Island. You're really almost like sister entities, sister cities in a lot of ways. But we've got a lot of experience working with technical systems. We also have experience in more simple water systems, but regional wholesalers, you know, we've worked with 2-ton Washington Benton Regional Water Authority, so large systems are not unfamiliar to us, complicated systems are not unfamiliar to us, but this is, I would say, certainly on the complicated side for sure. Now, just from working in the district, I can also tell you that the way the system was installed, I would say, is less than ideal. A lot of the lines were not installed with what we would consider modern techniques. There's not proper bedding on a lot of the line, and the materials of construction are somewhat outdated and no longer used in the industry. But having said that, that's also not that unusual. We see that all over the state where systems were not installed properly, or they're comprised of materials which are no longer used anymore. Lead, cast iron, asbestos cement, which you have here in Holiday Island. Other materials, Orangeburg pipe on sewer side. There's a lot of pipe that is types that are no longer used in our line of work. Nevertheless, there's still miles and miles, hundreds of miles in the ground, state and nationwide. We've recently done projects removing AC pipe, cast iron, lead lines, you name it, almost, you'll see it in the study. Having said that, some of those materials don't hold up so well over time, and you've got galvanized iron, you've got asbestos cement, you've also got PVC, but some of those materials have not held up so well, and there's a reason we don't use them anymore. I know that Holiday Island has, I think, a fair amount of water loss in the system because of some of these issues they've had with poor installation and materials that are, past their lifespan and in need of replacement. I think the thing that's working in your advantage, relatively cheap cost of water production here in Holiday Island, that's a luxury for your customers. But the system is certainly in need of some repair and rehabilitation. And I know you've been doing that, and it's an ongoing process. You'll never really be done with it. The size of your system, you'll never be able to just rehab it and dust your hands and say, well, we're done, because there's always some new problems. The ground, even imperceptible to most of us, slightly shifts. Little tiny shifts can cause problems in the underground piping, leaks. It's just the nature of buried utilities. So, but I'd say you have. You're fortunate that your water production costs are low, and to this point, there's been no problems with supply that I'm aware of. Quality is good, but the distribution system could use some work.
Could you be more specific?
Or give us recommendations, prioritize what needs to be done first.
So,
Explain the challenges of it.
Sure. I think, ultimately, you've got a lot of pipe in the ground that needs to be repaired and replaced. But because of the nature of your system, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to start replacing pipe until you get some of your other problems corrected first. So, Holiday Island, your storage tanks, and this is everywhere, generally are located at the high points. That's what creates the pressure in your system so that when you're in your house and you open the faucet, water comes out. But parts of Holiday Island are much lower elevation. And so as you get lower elevations, your pressure goes up. Well, at some point you can exceed the pressure capacity of the piping, or certainly what you'd want to have in your house. And so you have valves in the system that regulate that shed some of those pressures as you go downhill. Holiday Island has a very large swath that sort of runs through the center of the district that is at a lower elevation, and it's consequently at higher pressures. The whole area is surrounded by pressure reducing valves. Every line that feeds into that part of the system has a valve on it. Those valves, up until recently when the district has started replacing some, had been in the ground from the inception. So very old, 40, 50 years in the ground. And consequently, we're no longer working well. And I believe, is the source of some of the issues on the distribution system. Because you get pressure surges that can come down the line, and certainly on some of the asbestos cement line can cause some issues, cause some ruptures, and is undoubtedly the source of some of the leakage in the system. But if you go in and you find a leak and you dig it up and you repair it, but you ultimately did not address the underlying concern, you're going to end up with the same type of problem over and over again, and you've really not spent your money in the most effective fashion. So I think the first step, and this is what we had recommended when we produced our previous study, was to address the pressure reducing valves first. Once we had those replaced, then you could come in and do the rehab and replacement on the pipe work. And now those new lines are protected from the underlying issues, the high pressure issues that you see in the system.
And the PRV valve replacement has been in progress, I think, for the last several years, right, Dan?
Where do we stand on that?
Do you know how many have been replaced, more or less?
We got 14 that's been replaced, we've got 39 total.
How many total?
39.
39 total, 14 have been replaced. So, let's just assume we had them all replaced. Is there a way, and I'm not a technical person by any means, but is there a way to determine where the major leakage is so that those particular lines can be replaced that are causing the most problems?
Well, I would say yes. There are a variety of ways that you can locate leaks. Let me preface it by saying part of the difficult nature of your system is the underlying geologic features here in the area. So this part of the world is sitting on what's known as karst topography. It's limestone bedrock primarily, which is prone to crevices, cracks, dissolution chambers, caves. And it makes finding leaks more challenging. You can have leaks in the system that you would never find just by walking and visually observing, do we have a leak? Because it'll leak and go into a crack or crevice and disappear, and you never know it. And you would never know it. So it does make it more challenging, but there are ways you can find them. You can use devices where you actually listen for the sound of a leaking pipe. I've seen people use a variety of techniques. I've seen dogs that are trained to find leaks from the aroma of chlorine. They can smell the chlorine in the water, and that's how they find it. There are satellite-based leak imaging programs where, similar to the technology where we're looking for water on Mars, you can use it to find the chemical signatures of potable water in the ground and therefore find leaks. So there's a variety of techniques that you can use. But having said that, Holiday Island is, unfortunately, on the more challenging side just because of the underlying topography.
And we have, correct me if I'm wrong, but with our previous district manager, I walked many, many miles of our water system here, listening with the headphones. So to my knowledge, we've never brought dogs in or used satellites, but.
Those dogs are not cheap.
I have an opportunity for my dog.
I think there's one currently working in the U.S., right, Dan? That dog, that's probably a six-figure dog.
There's one in, I think it's Central Arkansas.
Yeah. There was a presentation in Hot Springs. Did you see that?
Yeah.
That was fantastic.
Dan, didn't you say that they brought in a company to try to find leaks years back and didn't have
Yeah,
any
that
luck?
was before I lived here, but I heard about it, that they brought in a company that specialized in finding and fixing leaks, and they focused on the island, and they did find some leaks, and they did fix those leaks, and the leak rate went down for a couple of months, and then it came right back to where it had been, and so it didn't seem to be very productive.
Leaks in distribution systems that's not a problem that's unique to Holiday Island. That occurs everywhere. Every system struggles with it. Every system tries to get that number to approach zero. Nobody ever gets there. But your goal is to reduce the amount of leaks to as low as possible. But it can be challenging at times.
I know I've had numerous conversations with Dan about leaks, and if a leak were a big leak and gurgled up out of the ground, it's easy peasy to fix it.
Easy.
But in Dan's words, we don't have a big one.
Right.
We have hundreds of very small ones
Yes.
that go down like you described. And
Right.
it just, short of excavating everything, it makes it very difficult.
Yes, one leak that leaks 1,000 gallons a minute, probably pretty easy to find, you know. 100 leaks at 10 gallons a minute, you know, you can probably find some of those. 1,000 leaks at 1 gallon a minute, you know, it's a lot more challenging.
That's it.
Where would those leaks typically occur?
Well, every system is slightly different, but if you want to just paint with a broad brush, usually about half the leaks are on the public side, on the distribution side, the district-owned infrastructure, and about half is on the private side, you know, on the homeowner's side of the meter, the plumbing side. So you can lose a lot of water on either side of the meter. Fortunately, you're only responsible for the public side, but nevertheless, you can still see a lot of leaks. Now, fortunately, the leaks that are on the private side of the meter, you know, you're collecting revenue on. The leaks on your side of the meter, just revenue vanishes into the ether.
Jeff, going back to the 39 PRVs and 14 have been replaced, if all 39 were replaced, that's a huge task, but if all 39 were replaced, what percentage of the, just a guess, how would that affect the leaks overall?
Well, really, it would not address the leaks at all.
Okay.
The PRV replacement would not eliminate any leaks, but it would then allow you to move forward aggressively with a leak rehabilitation program. And not that you shouldn't do any finding and fixing until then. If there is a leak and you're able to find it and fix it, it's a significant leak, you should do that. But you really shouldn't start attacking with large projects, certainly in the high pressure areas of the system, until you get those PRVs addressed.
Well,
But the PRVs themselves, they actually don't address leakage.
on the private side, as you mentioned, I have a friend on the island that's replaced his in his home 4 times.
Right, inside the house.
Yeah. And that's a problem financially and otherwise.
Can you tell me with municipalities that you've worked with lately who are actually replacing the lines that they have, how much it's costing them per mile to replace the line, you know, and if they're in the road, you know, how much it costs to repave the road and all of that sort of stuff?
I've done a couple of recent jobs that are somewhat similar. So we worked in the city of Jasper and the city of Marshall, a couple of projects very similar, a lot of asbestos cement lines, full replacement. Now you're going to get me quoting footages.
Well, no, I
want to
know,
say
just an estimate.
maybe $1 million a mile. I mean, it can be when you're in town, especially older towns, Jasper and Marshall qualify. Those are fairly complicated systems, not because of their terrain, but because of the history of the system, Marshall specifically, where you had 2, 3, 4, some instances 5 water lines running down the same road, where they never replaced a line, they just added a line, and added a line, and added a line, and you have here's an 1.25 inches, and here's a 2 inch, and then we've got a 4 inch, and a 6 inch, and they're all tied together. That makes it complicated. But both of those cities, we did replacement projects where we pulled AC lines out of the ground and replaced them with PVC. They don't have the same sort of topography, so we did, you know, the PRV situation is not the same. But cities all over the state have those types of pipes in the ground, and we are working to replace them when we can. Another one that's in the works is also in Searcy County, the city of Leslie. We're working on the same thing for them. getting AC pipe out of the ground.
How did they pay for that, Jasper and Marshall?
Jasper, it was through the USDA Rural Development Program. Marshall, it was through ANRC. Marshall, we were fortunate, is, you know, a different atmosphere. We were fortunate that was 100% grant, $2 million free, that we got for them for that project. Jasper,
But you said just $2 million.
yeah, it was $2 million.
In our case, that would do 2 miles out of 69 miles.
Yeah, right. So, you know, Marshall's a much smaller, in terms of, you know, size than Holiday Island. And we were primarily focused in the old downtown part of Marshall. So geographically smaller. Jasper also, you know, smaller than Holiday Island. And again, we were working in the old downtown part, but basically the entire downtown part of Jasper got new water lines.
Apparently, some of our lines are 4-inch lines, which is no longer the industry standard. It probably was when they were put in, but it's not now. Can you talk about what issues that creates in the system and
Well, let me first back up and you know, 4-inch lines not being the standard, I don't know that I would agree with that statement. There are a lot of small diameter lines all over the state, and they're still being put in to this day. It's very hard to justify if you have a small extension that's going to serve 6 houses, putting in an 8-inch line. You know, it's hard. A lot of people don't want to pay the cost for that. The demand that those homes produce certainly wouldn't justify a large line. You could supply the needs of those homes with a smaller line. If you want to look at providing fire flow capacity, though, then you do need larger lines. Generally, you go to an 8-inch line. You could get by with a 6, but generally you want to do 8 for fire flow. And we do work in cities where that's kind of their rule of thumb. We don't put in anything less than 8. Although they have a lot of miles in their system that are less than 8, because that wasn't always the standard. But again, if you're not trying to provide fire flow, there's no reason in a lot of instances to put in those larger lines.
And our fire chief told us that he knows exactly what he's going to do in order to work with the supply of water. He talked about tender trucks and things like that, so he's got it worked out. Talked to us last time. So that's not that unusual to have 4-inch lines. I thought maybe they were verboten or something.
No. In fact, you'll see 3-inch lines, 2-inch lines, certainly in rural parts of the system. That is very common, absolutely very common. Even large cities where their systems, you know, the things with water, unlike sewer, water systems often extend well beyond the municipal limits of the city that is supplying the water. And in those rural parts of the system, it is very common that you have small diameter lines.
So Jeff, this diameter of the water lines is kind of a hot topic in the community right now, and I think it began probably in this room when the fire chief talked about when they went to test water hydrants and hooked a pumper truck and cranked it up and blew up a line. From that point on social media, the inference was made that we were in violation of codes and safety and all these things. Am I wrong in saying that we're not?
Is that true?
You know, if they're currently installing 4-inch lines today and smaller lines, it would lead me to believe that it's acceptable.
Yeah, so, you know, what is considered acceptable today is not the same as what was acceptable when your system was installed.
Right.
So the things that we do today are different. And were I putting a 4-inch line in the ground today, I would not install a fire hydrant that had a pumper nozzle on it attached to that line. They do make fire hydrants called two-way hydrants that don't have the large pumper nozzle on them. And you can get plenty of water out of a two-way fire hydrant on a 4-inch line, but it's not enough to supply a pumper truck. So the things that we do today are a little bit different. Are you in code compliance? I mean, I really can't speak to that. It's not my place to say. You know, the health department is probably the entity that would tell you one way or the other. But were we doing some replacement or rehab work on those lines, and we pulled a 4-inch line out and it had a 3-way hydrant on it, and we put a new 4-inch line in, we would replace the hydrant with a 2-way. It wouldn't have a pumper nozzle. If we upgraded and brought your line size up to 6 or 8, sure, 3-way fire hydrant.
So when you say it doesn't have a pumper nozzle, it would be a fitting that goes to a tanker truck.
Right.
And then you daisy chain off of that to your pumper. And then, so you're backfilling the water to the tanker.
That and under normal operation, say you have a 6 or an 8 or an even larger line, and you have a 3-way fire hydrant that has a nozzle on it that accepts the suction hose for the pumper truck. Yes, they hook up to that hydrant, they pull water out of the system, run it through the pumper truck, and then use it to fight the fire. And those demands are pretty high. It's fire flow, 1,000 gallons a minute or more. You know, if you're fighting a fully involved fire, you need a lot of water. But you can't pull that kind of water through smaller lines without potentially damaging. You can collapse lines.
I think
you
Chief,
can choke the pump down. You can't get the water that you need.
I think Chief, in his presentation here, talked about trying to pull 2,500 gallons per minute out of that little line. And,
Yeah.
that's not
So I
possible.
think his plan was to hook a tanker truck
Yeah.
to that.
And then fill the truck and
Yes.
then fight with the tanker.
Exactly. So the
You
tanker
can
truck
do that.
becomes your buffer
Yeah, right.
between
Right.
that's the plan.
That's not a problem with the current setup here in the district. You can do that.
Exactly.
Well,
Other questions?
Getting back to the PRV valves and so forth, you said that replacing all 39 of them would not markedly help us right now. If you were to look at our, let's say 5 miles of our roads, we have 69 or 70 miles of roads here. As an engineer and working on this all your career, would you recommend looking at least 5 miles of road, maybe where we need fire protection more than where there's 2 houses on one road, street? Is there any scenario that you would say, you know, Board of Commissioners, I think you ought to take a look at these 5 miles of road, and it's $5 million. I don't know where you're going to get the money, but if I were the engineer that would make a recommendation, it would be these 5 roads. Would you comment on that?
We, yes, and we often do that.
And then when we prepared for the grant,
Yes.
identified those roads.
And we often do that. There are some financing programs where we're required to do that. So we do that for a lot of our clients. And we look at different metrics, cost per customer, cost per mile, and often prioritize more efficient areas. You know, you want to get the bang for your buck, right? So often that is how we prioritize, and I think we did set that up in our last report. Here's where we can most efficiently spend our money, so let's attack that area first. Yes, we do that, absolutely.
But if you can't figure out where the leaks are, how do you know what to even fix first?
Yeah.
Which is the biggest leak?
Right.
That's
Right.
the,
But it,
That's part of the calculus too. So if you've got a large leak, you know, that accounts for a large volume, it could overrule, well, there's not a lot of houses, not a lot of customers, but it's a large leak. So it can be prioritized over a segment that has more customers. So it's more than just price per customer or price per mile. There's a lot of factors that go into how we prioritize the suggested work. But we try to look at it, you know, as a whole.
oh,
Jeff, the current grant application before the Arkansas Department of Agriculture, I think it's a hair over $7 million. That was the process that y'all went through with Dan, was to identify these, and I think they were all 4-inch line areas where a majority of the leaks currently are occurring that they have to repair, the leaks they know about. So there is some thought put into that process.
a lot of fun.
There certainly has been, yes.
I'm glad that Bob brought that up because, as he said, social media is blown up about we're kicking the can down the road or plugging the leaks with our finger rather than replacing lines and so forth. The money is not there without like doubling your assessment to replace some of these things that you just brought up today. And that's why I love these workshops, because we can discuss it fully. I have one last question on this project. About how long would it be start to finish to install this and get it done?
You know, you look at the sketch and there's just like not a lot there. Surely this would not take very long. Equipment lead times, however, have really grown recently, so lead time on getting the equipment can often make what seems like a small project drag out. Pre-pandemic, I would look at this job and I would probably say, you know, 6 to 9 months is a reasonable construction time, just because of the lead time on the equipment. But today, I would probably have a year in construction time on this.
Okay.
Not that it would actually take the contractor a year to build this,
Yeah.
but they don't have these units, these UV disinfection units sitting on the, you can't go down to Lowe's and pick one of these up.
Right.
You put in an order through Trojan and they fabricate one for you.
Okay.
And that can take some time.
Okay.
So there would be a significant amount of time where we're under contract just waiting for equipment to be delivered.
You're probably waiting 6 months for that.
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah.
8 months.
Yeah.
We'd be lucky to get it done in the 3 years that our permit's going to run.
Well, I think we're still, you know, we're not in any danger of exceeding 3 years at this point.
Okay.
But we probably shouldn't dither, you know, for another year.
Okay.
All we gotta
They
do
would
is,
they would probably look favorably upon us if we had a contract, you know, and
Yes. DEQ is not interested in being punitive if you're trying to do the right thing. If it's a supply chain issue, they're not going to be fining you because you're not in compliance because it's a supply chain issue. You're trying to get it done. It's the communities that are just ignoring the mandates or actively thumbing their noses at the state. They sort of frown on that.
the only
I
issue,
can't imagine.
Yeah, they did give you a timeline. I mean, the first year you had to at least say you got, I can't remember right now, but
Yeah.
every year you had to submit a letter saying.
Yeah,
where you're
here's
at.
the plan, here's the
Yeah.
corrective action, here's where we're at. They do want to be brought up to date on the progress and make sure that you are making progress towards the goal of being in compliance, you know, in 2025.
of course, the issue for us is finding the money.
It's
Because
the issue for everybody. quite honestly.
unfortunately, social media just thinks that we can abandon any of the HICID assets, and we can't without risking our whole AOB. So we've got to figure out where is that money going to come from. So, but you've at least given us a figure to look at. Any commissioners have any other questions,
Yes,
comments?
I think, well,
We'll go to the audience in a minute.
yeah, I
Any
think
other
she wants.
commissioners?
Another social media thing that has surfaced in the last week, Jeff, is the radon issue and the inference that our water system is full of radon and that we're all gonna become ill. I'm aware of a well that we have that we don't use that had some radon issues that would have needed to be mitigated to make it potable. Dan, maybe you
Okay,
can.
and it's offline.
Yeah,
That well's
and it
offline.
never has been used, has it?
It has been periodically used.
Oh, okay.
I guess I'll just leave it like that. I mean, it's over the limit. We're talking by just a couple milligrams a liter.
But it's not even putting water in the system now.
The water we put through the system day to day today does not have a radon issue.
No, it doesn't have radon.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
may I ask another question, Dan? You and I talked about this just last week, in fact. The state comes in and we pay for this service. The state comes in and tests our water.
And we pay for it.
And yeah, we pay for it. Is that monthly?
Quarterly.
Quarterly, okay. I couldn't remember and I didn't want to misspeak.
So there's a whole.
Okay.
And radon
would
is
you
one of the
speak
things
to-
they test it for.
Barbie?
Radon is one of the things they test it for? Okay, thank you.
Would you speak generally about the quality of our water? We're meeting all the standards.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's no question of our water quality.
No, because each time they do when they grab a sample, like for instance, let me put my glass on. So this one here is inorganic chemical analysis. And right on the front page, it says finished water quality is within allowable limits of the primary drinking water standards, the Safe Drinking Water Act. And there's nitrate, nitrite. They did on well 5 and well 4. So I mean,
So they test water coming out of each well.
oh yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do we have any questions from the audience? Barb?
Yeah, just a quick question on the pressure reducing valves. You stated a couple of times now that putting those in is not gonna fix any leaks. That I understand, it's not a fixing thing. But the point of putting them in is to reduce the chance of getting further leaks. Is that not true?
Right, well, we believe that one of the underlying causes of the leaks are pressures that exceed the capacity of some of the lines. And especially if you have a pump come on and you get a surge down the line. And those can cause the pipe to rupture and then create a leak. The pressure reducing valves protect those areas of the system from those types of surges and high pressures, and therefore would prevent the pipe from rupturing and leaking. So if you're in the high pressure zone and you've located a leak and you go in and you make a repair, but you have not prevented those high pressure surges, you can just have a break in the same spot that you just repaired.
Very good, that's what, I just wanted to say, you know, we're not wasting money by putting in these valves.
No, they're definitely necessary.
Yeah, that's what you're saying should be our priority
Yes.
issue right now.
I think if you go back to our previous recommendations, that was our number one priority. You know, the first phase, if you will, of the improvements was to get those replaced.
What's our program on that, Tammy?
Well, I can tell you that we have budgeted for 5 this year, and Dan and I talk regularly, don't we, Dan?
Yes.
About, and so we try to budget for as many as we can afford each year.
Okay.
And so
And
we're
highlighting obviously the worst cases to begin with.
correct. He said there were 37,
39.
39 total.
Well, that's what I was just gonna ask
We've
Jeff.
done 14.
We talked about this earlier. That's what we have of record on there. But Jeff and I also discussed the fact that we may not have enough. Okay, so
So we've got
we're based on what's in the ground right now.
we've got 25 more and 5 scheduled for this year. And,
You know, we might have to do 40, 50, you know.
I think that was also in our recommendation that there may be some needed that just
Added.
weren't. Yeah.
No, they need to be
Additional.
added. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm just adding a few comments. You know, back a couple of years, I was Dan's worst nightmare. Because I kind of took this on.
No, you're not my worst nightmare.
And, you know, this whole pressure regulation thing, you know, ties directly back into the 4-inch line, because the 4-inch lines are all in the highest pressure, potential pressure areas of the system, and they are the least capable of withstanding pressure. The 8-inch pipes, the 6-inch pipes, they all have thick walls. They could stand any kind of pressure. You get down to the 4-inch lines, you know, it's very limited. And we, you know, Dan bought pressure transducers to put on the hydrants down around Thomas Circle and down the end of Table Rock down there where, you know, in the low areas. And we were actually reading pressure readings in the 250 PSI range.
Wow.
And now that was before we replaced any PRVs. We used to have a ton of leaks over here like on White Bass. It was just like every week, you know, fixing a leak on White Bass. We replaced the 2 PRVs that feed this zone here. And I believe, you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but the leaks either went away or are greatly diminished. So I totally support the idea of replacing the PRVs as fast as it can be, you know, done, because I think that directly does tie into the lease. The other point I guess I wanted to make was that, you know, we keep throwing out these numbers, this number of $1 million a mile. But I want to stress that all miles aren't created equal in Holiday Island. You know, it depends on, you know, the size of the line, the topography, how many service lines are hooked up to it, whether it's a gravel road or an asphalt road or a chip and seal road, all of that ties into cost. You know, it would cost us, I mean, and then not even thinking about the difficulty, you know, I don't know how we would even necessarily find the water line that connects Indian Hills to the end of Summit, that runs across no man's land down through the valley. You know, I guess on the map we know where it is, but to actually go out there and find that water line to replace it, I don't know, it'd be a challenge, I think. Then I want to get to another couple of social media issues if we can. The asbestos cement pipe and the breakages in the asbestos cement pipes. There's a theory, at least, that is a health hazard because people might be ingesting asbestos. Do you have any technical input on that?
Yes, so asbestos cement, the way that it's made, the asbestos fibers, you think about it with reinforced concrete. You have rebar inside of concrete, sort of augmenting the strength of the material. Asbestos performs that same role as the rebar does in reinforced concrete. It adds strength to the pipe. It's mixed into the matrix of the pipe. It's not running around loose in the pipe, for example. But having said that, it can be dangerous to work on if you're making a repair or you're in the field, you cut the pipe. Asbestos is really primarily a danger through inhalation. And the fibers, if they're, inside of the wall of the pipe, they don't really present a health or safety risk to you. But if you do some sort of activity where you create asbestos fibers and then you in turn breathe them in, you're in serious danger. So for Dan and his guys, if they go into the field and there's a leak on a line and they have to cut a section of asbestos cement out, they're out there maybe with a chop saw, cutting a segment of it out. You can create, and in fact, unless you take precautions, will create asbestos fibers that can be a health and safety hazard. Having said that, there are ways that you can minimize those risks. With AC pipe, if you're going to cut it, you need to make sure you keep it wet, spray it down so that you're not getting airborne fibers. But for those of you that your water comes to your house through an AC line, there's really not a danger of, being impacted through asbestos. It's like there's a lot of buildings, you go to certainly older towns, a lot of buildings have asbestos in them. And it's really not a problem until you go disturbing the asbestos. Disturbing the asbestos is what creates the problem.
The Clean Water Act sets a limit of, I believe it's 7 million fibers per liter of water. Dan, when they test our water, do we ever test for that? Or is it not required to be tested for?
I'd have to call them specifically. I don't know what they would. They don't call it asbestos, but I don't know. They check for benzene and all the other things, but I don't know about specific asbestos. We'd have to just call them.
Because that, like I said, that's one of the hot items on social media.
You would
think. The other is the risk of contaminating the water. Oh, and by the way, I've watched Dan's guys fix leaks. Keeping it wet isn't the problem.
It definitely adds, a level of additional risk for Dan and his guys working in the system.
Well, the plus side is asbestos. Usually when it breaks,
It's a clean break.
it's a clean break.
Yeah.
So,
And the last thing that is another hot item on social media is the risk of contamination from the leaks. That, leaks are an entry point for contamination. Do you have a technical opinion on that?
Under normal operation, no, because your system is always pressurized, and so getting contaminants into the line is you would have to have ground pressures exceeding the internal pressures in the line, which is very, very unusual and rarely would happen. The instance that might create some contamination issues were if you were maybe in a fire flow scenario, you're drawing a very large volume of water through a line, and you draw vacuum pressures inside the line, where you collapse lines, then you can pull contaminants in through breaks in the line, but that would be a rarity, and I won't say it's impossible, but it's unlikely.
Yes, sir, you had a question?
You would be aware of.
Jody?
Yes.
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 Sir.
What is the cost per total to install these replacement or pressure valves?
The PRVs. Dan, how much are they each?
About $3,000 each.
About $3,000 each, okay. And
That's
then
just for the valve though, that's.
do we contract for installation? Okay, so there's the installation cost.
So what does it cost to replace one?
Yeah, to replace one total installation.
It varies, I'd say $5,000 to $7,000.
Okay, $5,000 to $7,000 each.
I think it also depends on whether the vault that the current PRV is in is large enough to accept the new PRV. If you have to install a whole new vault, then the cost goes up significantly.
A lot of, from my experience in the system, a lot of the valve vaults are very, very small and cramped. Dan, you can speak to that, I know. You know, when they were installed, I'm sure they were done that way because that was the most economical way to do it.
Oh, yeah, and they're all in the middle of the road or.
In the middle of the road, really? Okay. So you gotta dig up the road too.
Right.
And then there's one other complicating factor that in order to be able to replace a PRV, you gotta be able to turn the water off. And a lot of these lines, the gate valves are frozen over 50 years or something like that. And, right, Dan?
That's correct. We might have to shut off more than one.
Yeah.
Sometimes we gotta shut off 4 or 5 or 6 of them to get one PRV out, so.
So it's one of those things where you touch one thing and it affects something else, which affects something else, yeah. All right, do we have any other questions, comments? Yes, sir, in the white shirt? I'm sorry.
I'd like to ask the engineer here, would line boring some of these lines decrease the cost of installation? And it could save, what I see is it could save us money in that you're not disturbing the road. You decommission the piping that you could go a different route to reestablish a new line. My other part of that question is, I'm familiar with at least 2-inch polyethylene lines that they use commonly in line boring, or what they call it where I come from, line boring. Is there 4-inch poly that could be line bored as well? And I do know this about poly, I think they handle quite a bit higher pressures than just PVC, and I would like to have Holiday Island consider that, especially on the verticals that go up high elevations, where you need the pressure to, with the piping to withstand those pressures along with the valves that you'd be putting in. But that way you'd be installing something that might last 100 years and serve us much better than reinstalling back with PVC pipe.
Yeah. So let me start back at the first question. Yes, poly line comes in a variety of diameters, including much larger diameters, and is frequently used in boring installations. So for water, a lot of times it's horizontal directional drilling, what we call HDD. Where you're from, they may call that boring. It is a form of boring. It's a trenchless technique, and it can be more economical in some situations. It can be a necessity in other situations. Like if you're trying to cross a major body of water, like a significant creek or river, you really can't open cut it. So you have to bore it. And when you do, if you're using a horizontal directional bore, the line is able to go under the obstacle, and the poly line allows it to be sort of curved, installed in a curvilinear fashion, and it handles that very well. HDPE, high density polyethylene line, can also handle very high pressures. Even the lightweight HDPE line has a very heavy wall section, so it is a robust material. Having said that, PVC there's PVC pipe that can very capably handle pressures up to 350 PSI. So it can also work very well, as can ductile iron, but HDPE it can handle all sorts of pressures that you throw at it. Another benefit of HDPE pipe is it's welded together, so there's really no joints like a traditional PVC line where you have one stick of pipe and you made it up to another one. The joint where those two meet can often be a source of your problems. HDPE, there are no such joints. It's the pipe, when you run it comes on a spool generally. When you get through one spool and you want to start the next one, you fuse the two pieces together. And so there's no real joint to leak there.
How would you connect laterals to that and create, I mean, I understand there's a great benefit in where you have high pressure elevations or drops.
So
how would you run your laterals off of that?
So you connect to it in a lot of the same ways that you would with PVC or ductile iron. If you're wanting to tee off of it, you can tap the line with a tapping saddle or tapping sleeve like you would a traditional line. You can put fittings in if you're, as you're installing it the first time, new installation. You can put fittings, traditional ductile iron fittings like T's or 45s or elbows. They make adapters to where you can go from HDPE to ductile iron back to HDPE, so that's not an issue. But you could also tap it if you're coming back in, there's an existing line you want to tie into it. They make the fittings that are necessary to do so.
Is it cost effective in this
That's what I was
terrain? I mean, I can't even get a shovel in the ground. I can't
That's the
imagine
question, is
So-
boring in this rock.
Boring in rock is not the same as boring in soil. It's not that it can't be done, but the costs are generally a lot higher. It's just harder to get through.
Madam Chair, lady over here had a question earlier, and I wanted to follow it up about the aquifer. Did you get your
Yes.
question answered?
Ms. Wilkes, do you have a question regarding water?
The question I had earlier was, with the low water, since we've had not much rain, my question was, are the aquifers safe enough with our water going into them? And also, since most of us are on well water, should we be concerned about the water in the wells?
I would say my knowledge of the water here in Holiday Island is you have it's very high quality water. The supply, the aquifer, it's a little bit out of my area of expertise, but I think it may be, 50, 100 years from now, I don't know. It's hard to know what the future holds. Are groundwater sources any less vulnerable than surface water sources? I don't know. That's hard for me to say. And it's a little out of my area.
And another concern, I have read that the water runoff from the golf course, which has fertilizers or chemicals in it, can get into the water system. Is that a concern?
I would say no. Surface runoff is not going to impact your wells that's supplying the water. Those are very deep wells, very deep. It's not something that, it soaks into the ground. It's going to get, you're 1,000 feet deep into the ground or more for these wells, and they're sealed all the way. The wellhead is sealed and they're fully encased. Surface contamination should not be an issue.
Thank you.
Well, they're getting us what
Other
they
question?
said recorded.
Other questions?
David.
Dave?
Dave Bishop. Jeff, I agree with you 100% on your explanation of the 4-inch lines and 8-inch lines. Can find no fault with it whatsoever. However, the point that seems to be being made and being glossed over by HICID, particularly within the social media and HICID's response, seems to be rather polar opposite. I agree, 100%. 4-inch lines are more than adequate for limited use. And as you stated, you're not gonna get a fire truck to run off of a 4-inch line. Okay, now, HICID is saying, well, it's been mitigated. We can put a pumper truck or we can put a kiddie pool or whatever in between. That's great too, but you got, what, 2,000-3,000 gallons worth of water in the kiddie pool, 1 minute later, the pumper truck is out of water. So you have not solved anything one way or the other. HICID's concern is collapsing lines primarily and keeping water running. Understandable. Fire, rather, is the concern of loss of life and property, which is an entirely different situation. You cannot get 8-inch column of water through a 4-inch pipe. You have a gazillion gallon reservoir right here where you could probably put out every fire in the state of Arkansas and Missouri if you could pump it. However, if all you've got is a 5-gallon bucket to get it from there to the fire, you're screwed. So just kind of, well, we just addressed that at the meeting and the engineer said it was okay as long as you had a buffer in between. Yeah, for that 20 seconds, 50 seconds, maybe a minute and a half and you're out of water. Fire is saying we need more access to the water to get it there so we can save your house or your life. That's what I get out of the social media commentary, and that argument I can find no fault with. So what HICID needs to address is how to get a bigger bucket in between the two. If we can get by on 4-inch lines, hey, I'm more than happy with that. Not a problem, other than they have a tendency to blow up and leak. But that's a different argument here. If you're concerned about life and property, you've got a whole other liability and moral issue here than just, well, 4-inch lines work, we don't have too much to worry about it, we'll put in the PRV, or PDRs, whatever they are. My other question would be more or less like kind of to Danny. Radon testing. When tests are made, where are the tests taken from? Right at the wellhead or?
Right at the wellhead.
Okay. Now, as I understand it from a conversation years ago with some people at State, our system is a single loop, and I guess it's a closed system, or at least it's a single loop water distribution system. Therefore, when water is pumped in from the well into the loop, and there are, what, 2-3 wells pumping in at the same time?
Just one on the island, 2 on the, over here.
Okay, we'll go with the 2. So where one well is, say well number 1 is pumping on that end of the line, well number 2 is pumping in on the other end of the line. There is no mixing tank in between them. They're just pumping in at that point source. So therefore, if one or the other well would be higher in radon, the homes drawing off of the water supply line would be getting probably a higher concentration of radon the closer they are to the well, because the entire loop is not mixed, correct?
Well 4 and well 5 do not have radon.
This is hypothetical, I'll grant you that.
Okay.
But I'm just, whatever contamination is closer to the well, right?
I'll give you that one, yeah. What's?
I'm just saying, if there is a concern, we're not getting an adequate mix within the lines of any radon, and I don't think it's an issue.
There is.
But wherever it comes in, being no mixing tank or actual agitation of the water, wherever, if a well picks up a contaminant, the closest one to that well within the entire loop is going to get more of that contaminant.
That's why they check it right at the well. That's first, right there at the well.
Yeah,
That's where they check it.
but
And none of the well water has any problems.
No, there's no record.
we're still within spec, I'm granting you that. If it should, one of the arguments on media was that it changes over lines due to, I don't know, over pumping and this, that, and the next thing. I don't particularly prescribe to that, but I just am raising the issue
goes from the well to the stand.
that the closer you are to the source, the more you are at risk, if there is a risk, to
Okay,
getting a
but
higher
I
concentration.
guess what I'm trying to say is the well's like right there at the podium, where they take the sample is right here.
As long as that well is within spec, there is no problem, correct? If that changes, you then change the parameter within the pipe at that location.
Maybe shut down
I didn't follow him.
at the well.
Let's just leave this one float. I'm not
Well, what,
making,
I mean, if it gets high, we got to shut it down.
yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Madam
Okay,
Chair,
leave that one go.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I wanted to say something, and that is that I've been on this board for 6 years, 2 3-year terms. I have not answered one question on social media that somebody has asked. The place to come is right here, where these 22 people are sitting. And you, just like a school board meeting or the county quorum court, when you want to know something, you either tune in on YouTube or Zoom, or you come to the meeting and you get up to the podium and you make your point. To listen to all the stuff that's been on social media about water, it doesn't make any sense. And one of them was to close down all amenities and then put in new pipe. Close down the swimming pool, close down the golf course, close down everything. Why would we, any of us who are elected to the board, respond to something like that? I'm not, and I don't think anybody around this table should either. But we've had some good comments, some really good comments today. We appreciate Jeff coming, Dan is here. They're the experts in water and sewer. That's why they're here. That's why we hired your firm. And everybody's been allowed to ask questions several times, 4 or 5 times, including me. And so that's why we have a workshop. 3rd Monday of every month if we need it. And the chair has called for that today. We had the other one on iOS, the insurance about the fire chief, and he did a great job. And that's where that problem came up about the fire hydrants. And so I think we're doing what we were charged by the state and to be a civ to do. The city has had really good turnout. I think they've got a meeting tomorrow night. There was about 20, 25 people right in those same chairs last week. I think the meeting is tomorrow night, Dan? Okay. So that's what public input is supposed to be. Come, make your choice, and if you don't like what the 5 members of the board are doing, run for the board. Throw them out. Get rid of me if I'm going to run next time. Vote for somebody else. But come and do your job of public input the right way. Not on Facebook, not on Twitter. Thank you.
Any other questions from the,
Yeah, I want to make just a couple of comments. These pressure reducing valves, when your company laid out that plan, this needs to be done, that should be the priority. Exactly, was that the report from 2017?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, so here we are 5 years later, and you're saying we've replaced 14 out of 39 known valves, possibly 14 out of 39 known, plus the 10 more we may need. So in 5 years, we've replaced 14 valves. And we got a plan this year to replace 5. Okay, so let's throw it out there that it's $10,000 a valve. Because I want you to have them nice, pretty houses they go in like they're supposed to be. That's the best we can do. It seems to me, and I'm not accusing anybody of can kicking, but what I am saying is your priorities are known by how you spend your money.
right,
Okay? You can say whatever you want to say, but when the checks get signed, that's how I tell what the 5 priorities are. Now, these valves need to be replaced. I think everybody agrees with that. But in 5 years, we've managed 14 of them. That doesn't make it a priority. You can find $300,000 or $400,000 to rebuild a rec center that, quite frankly, nobody gives a fat monkey's butt about. I haven't heard the first person say, damn, I wish they'd hurry up and get that rec center finished. Bob made the point last time, and he was exactly right. Janice, it's worked just fine like it is. Shelve that sucker. Put it on the back burner. It's working fine. I've heard 2 people complain because the back pool's not open. I didn't even know they had one for 6 months. But I don't know why it's closed, I'm not gonna argue that. My point is, the money's there to put those valves in. You just don't wanna spend it on valves. You wanna spend it on other stuff. I'm gonna tell you something, if this is really a priority to you, then you're gonna start cutting in other areas and you're gonna put your money where your mouth is.
And I will tell you,
I have never stood up here, I've never made one post on social media that advocated cutting out amenities. And that gets me on people's bad side, but I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't know a person in this community that moved here before they built a golf course. I don't know a person that moved here before we had a pool. It was here when you got here. You should have bought someplace else. You should have done your due diligence and found out what a heist it is and how much it charges you. And if you didn't like it, you should have gone someplace else.
Amen.
Okay? Now, having said that, and I'm going to ramble a little bit. I'm sorry. I've listened to all this stuff. Having said that, it doesn't relieve you of the responsibility to spend our money wisely. And I'm not accusing you of not doing that. I'm not privy to all the budget stuff. But it does mean that this water system needs to be a priority. It doesn't mean we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we got to get this under control. And I'm going to tell you something, this 4-inch pipe is more of a concern. You kind of washing over that a little bit, even your statements, well, it's okay if I'm running water to 6 houses. It is not okay if I'm depending on it for the fire chief to pump 1,500 gallons of water a minute into a truck that's got 5-inch hoses trying to suck water out of a 4-inch main. You don't have to be an engineer or a rocket scientist to figure out how that's going to play out. Okay? I mean, you can. We've got 2-inch mains in this community. Every part of this water system has fire hydrants. Now, Dan, if I misquote you, you slap me down. But when Dan and I talked on the phone, the fire chief's right. It's not just the 4-inch line hydrants we have a problem with. The vast majority of our hydrants will not suck water at 1,500 gallons per minute that he needs. His pumper truck will carry 2,500 gallons and fighting a fire. He's out of water in 7 minutes. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Mr. Bischoff's exactly right. You're getting into a liability issue. You're talking about people's safety and welfare. And I'm not saying you intentionally don't care. But what I am saying is if your house goes up one day and well, we got to wait for the tanker truck, 2 hydrants that won't hook to a pumper. That sounds like something we do in the Army. What am I supposed to do? Hook a water sprinkler up to it? If it won't support a fire truck, don't call it a fire hydrant. He needs to be able to draw enough water. It's a danger to his firefighters. Now, last time we had a meeting, I asked the question, what percent of our water system is made up of these 4-inch lines? Not one person could tell me. Not one. Mr. Stamp spoke up and said it's less than 10%. You know how much it is? Anybody in here know?
60 days.
Dan probably knows.
It's not that much. Dan knows because 20 miles of the 68 is 4-inch pipe. That's over 20%. And then you got some 6 and you got some 8. Now I take that back. The 20 miles is the combination of 4 and the 2-inch. I don't have an answer. If it's $1 million a mile, I don't know how you're going to do that. Y'all figure it out. I don't know. But we need to take some steps. We need to do some things that these guys are telling us to do, and we need to budget for it. I mean, my God, if we can recover a pickleball court, whatever the crap that is, for 25 grand, how many valves does that buy? I mean, and I'm not saying don't have pickleball, but if your ball bounces a little crooked, we got to have priorities. And a lot of people, and you're right, social media, it gets skewed and people get off focus, and it always comes back to amenities instead of attacking the problem. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not being critical of you guys. I'm not being critical of the mayor. And when he was on here, I'm just saying, we can find the money. To me, there's two places, now, and I'll shut up, there's two places that should never be cut. And that's the water department and the fire department. Okay? Everybody else can learn to get by on the West Rec Center. Yes, the golf course. Okay? We can look at ways to improve how we manage them and run them. But we got to get this water system fixed. The fact that the majority of our hydrants, not just 4-inch hydrants, are not working up to capacity should alarm you guys. And I think that's where everybody's getting frustrated about. I'll shut up.
I think we all are alarmed. The biggest problem that we have on the board is figuring out how to finance the issue. If that was a $7 million sewer plant, $5 million sewer plant, we all pay $13 a month on our water bill to help pay for that cost. Well, if we took care of 20 miles, which is only 1/3 of the system, are we all willing to pay $100 a month on our water bill for it? There's no way. We can't or I can't. Maybe there's somebody somewhere here that can figure out how to pay for this project. Gosh, we'd love to. And the hardest issue is, we ended up with what, about $300,000 last year that we had to allocate with capital improvement projects, major things that need to be done, and so deciding which one needs to be done first. And you're right, that's why every year there has been money allocated for the PRV replacement. It's not fast enough, but we can't really do that without letting other things fall apart. So,
I will say though, Suzanne, and Steve, you bring up very good points, and I commend you on that. And that's why these kind of workshops are so important, is to get that kind of feedback. But we have not, and I think Dan would tell you, we have never told him you can only replace 5, or you can only replace 4. They've followed a systematic, that's a word I see a lot on social media, I looked it up. We have tried to follow a very systematic approach at replacing these, and Dan identifies for us which he believes are the priority ones to do. And hasn't it been that way, Dan? Would you agree?
Well, I would agree with you totally. And the other problem is the employment. I got 4 guys.
Yeah.
That's it. So all the other routine stuff we have to do every single day and run a wastewater plant, that only leaves me to go out and fix these PRVs. Because once they're installed, they got to be adjusted. And they got to be turned off, because these guys don't, the contractor don't have a clue where to turn it off.
No.
So we'll have to turn it off. They put it in, and then we'll have to, start it up and get it adjusted and everything else. So between.
Well, I'll challenge you, Mike.
That's why
I have so much respect for this man. I can't tell you. But I will challenge you to put together a 2-year plan to finish these damn things off. And bring it to us at our budget meeting.
May I interject? I have had and I love that idea, Commissioner Dyer. I have had a conversation with Jeff about us taking a significant amount of our CIP into next year, maybe 2 years out, to do just that. And if, may I also, to your point, sir, and thank you for your comments. You've got some very good and constructive comments. But that was a 2017 study that, if I'm not mistaken, began budgeted in 2018. So you said there were 14 PRVs done in 5 years. There's actually been 14 done in 4 years, and this would be the 5th year, which we're doing 5, so that's 19 in 4 years. So just to correct those numbers a little bit, because I think the plan was basically to do 5 each year. And we'll be doing 19 in 4 years, so we're almost on track to do that. And I think after this discussion and the board's approval, we can accelerate that over the next year or two and try to get that project done. And what I told Jeff is I would like to work with ESI and finding a contractor that could commit to coming in here and just getting these things done, because it is a top priority, and thank you again for your comments.
And I'd like to say one more thing. I threw Dan under the bus kind of, but I spent a lot of time on the phone with Dan. I learned a lot of stuff that kind of nipped that social media crap in the bud by listening to Dan. We're lucky we got this guy. He's got a ton of experience. And the day I talked to him, this guy's been out His guys have been out after midnight fixing the break, and we're back in at 7 o'clock the next morning. So I just want to say that I'm in no way being critical of you, that I appreciate like hell what you and you guys do. We had a blowout on Horseshoe last year from the fire department closing a hydrant too fast and blew out a line. And I'm not lying. Before I could think about getting on the phone, his guys were over there, because he can tell where he works when he's got something major going on. And we were back with water going that day. I mean, it was just a few hours, and it was back online going good. So
Steve, you forgot one of the variables of them getting called out. They'll go out and fix those lines in below 0 temperatures too. You know, they're not 70-degree mermaids.
All right.
Mermaids.
Yes, Ms. Wells?
I like mermaids.
Suzanne said that.
I do have a question and a comment. I would like to know who goes out and bleeds the water hydrants to make sure that they are working, and also who takes care of mowing around the fire hydrants to make sure that they can be seen. Because the one about 3 blocks from my home grew up, the grass, the weeds, everything covered that fire hydrant. You could not see it. And one of the neighbors took his mower down and trimmed and mowed around that fire hydrant. However, the fire hydrant itself, you cannot see most of it because the paint has busted off. I'm concerned about the fact that the fire hydrants cannot be seen. Do you know, does the fire department know where the fire hydrants are?
I
Yes.
should hope so.
Yes, absolutely, they do. And they do go out and test them. There are certain ones that I know they've communicated with Dan about the ones that are problematic, but they do routinely test those. It's part of their daily operations and part of the ISO requirements. And to answer your other question, the roads department does the mowing.
Does the mowing, okay. There is a lot of property out around on Venus and the other areas out in my area that really need to be mowed, trimmed, taken care of. There are tree limbs overhanging the roads. I mean, it's sad out there. We feel like we're kind of forgotten out there sometimes. All of our neighbors are very concerned. And also, while I'm on the subject of that, there is a place, as you come off of State Line, you turn onto Venus, there is probably, I would say probably 50, maybe 100 feet from that turnoff there. Someone has removed some of the pavement there. It's probably a good 4 or 5 feet across and probably 5 or 6 feet this way. That pavement has been removed. There is a ditch there that was filled with gravel, and that gravel has been, something has happened to the gravel. When you go across that, you have to either go all the way off of the road on this side, all the way off of the road on this side, to miss that ditch. It's more of an extended pothole, if you will. I went
It's a water leak.
right straight across it the other day in my car. It's this deep. It needs to be repaired.
Okay, Ms. Wilkes, I assure you, I'll have someone out there today to take a look
Okay,
at that.
thank you, sir. Because somebody's gonna hit that really, really hard. Because we do have speeders on Venus as well.
Well, that's so.
But somebody's gonna hit that really, really hard and lose control, and then what happens?
We'll get out there and take a look at it today.
I would assume there was a water leak there that the water department corrected, and typically they let those settle a little bit before they put new asphalt in, but Danny will get it taken care of.
And I'm going to piggyback off one of the remarks that Commissioner Brown made. We like having input like this, but if you have an immediate issue, an immediate concern, the best person for you to go to is the person in charge of that department, either the water department or the road department. And you can probably get things taken care of faster than having to wait till our monthly meetings. So go to them first, and they can help.
Yes, ma'am. If you will excuse me though, I have become known as the neighborhood bitch because I have raised so much pain about the things out there that are problems that have not been taken care of. I started my 5th year living in my home. I am very concerned about the needs in Holiday Island. The water concerns me, the fire hydrants concern me, the fire department concerns me. This, and as Mr. your name, sir? Steve, as Steve said, you need to take care of the problems and quit fiddling around with building new rec centers. Quit fiddling around with pulling the rocks out of the swimming pool.
I never accused anybody of
It's a mindset to this fact that it has to be taken care of. You've got to do maintenance on a city if you're going to have one. We don't have businesses up on the strip because nobody wants to go shopping there. They want to go to Walmart. Why?
Because they can't find help.
That's
Because
a
they
good
can't find
answer.
help here. I have friends that have actually begged to be able to work
It's
here
3
in
minutes.
Holiday Island because this is where they live. They drive 50 miles to and from work. Now tell me why all of those stores that there on that strip mall are empty. There are very few people who have businesses up there. And one of my dear friends put a business in, and because of some whatever scandals or something, somebody started a rumor about his business, he closed up. Now, he had been invested over $2 million to come here to set up a business, to buy businesses that will.
Let's let Ms. Talbot talk
We've had enough of that.
about chamber.
Taken care of.
3 minutes.
Yeah. Let me recognize Ms. Talbot.
I'm going to be speaking as a homeowner, not the chamber. I'm not well versed in the legalities and procedures, but my understanding was this was a special meeting and that you could only discuss issues that were on the agenda for this meeting. And my understanding, this was related to the waste water system and the water system.
Sure.
I respect Mavis's and anyone else. I've got issues also that I do, as you say, I go directly to that department to get those issues addressed. And if there's something that is in particular is a great priority, I would suggest that people get with their commissioners to request that it be placed on the agenda so that it can be openly discussed with the public. And having said that, I am requesting, because I have other obligations.
Me too. And me too.
I'm requesting for a call of a motion to adjourn.
And I think that's very appropriate this time. Before we do that, I just want to say, Jeff, thank you so much for coming up and
Yes.
giving your expertise, your technical expertise. None of us that are sitting on this board know a lot. I tell you what I've discovered, don't take turning a faucet on or flushing a toilet for granted. That's what I've learned. So thank you so much for coming today. I do call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.